Well, greetings, fans. It's your friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton, back with another Beyond report. And here with me today is a man who needs a little introduction, Dr. Mike Heiser, biblical scholar extraordinaire. How are you, Mike?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good.
Well, we've been doing Fringe Pop this week.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. What do you think?
It's pretty fringy.
Yeah. That's one way to say it, right? So we talked about. We've talked about weird things like zombies and witches and
satyrs,
yeah. And everything in between.
Yeah, and then I did. We filmed a couple. My sessions today. What did I do? It's kind of a challenge to remember what I did on any given day. We did a couple Ark of the Covenant, the Zuio Maru Plesiosaur. I know I'm butchering that Japanese word.
That's the one they found near New Zealand.
Yeah, that's the one of three off New Zealand. What else did we do? Oh, we did a couple biblical ones. You know, the myth of the third of the angels' rebellion. We did that. That's just because we want snarky things on the YouTube channel.
Sure.
Just in the comments. We did one on false prophets. One on America did French and English explorers encounter giants in southeast U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one on Mesoamerican giants. That one was basically the content of Codex Rios, which there's a famous, well, maybe not a famous, but probably a well-trafficked picture from that codex.
Mm-hmm.
That depicts a giant, but it's actually based upon a story in a different codex that was just translated into English. So it's kind of a convoluted path. But yeah, those are the sessions we did.
Did you consult the Tedlock translations?
It was Beerhorst for that one codex.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the codex. I'll butcher it. It was Chopa something. I'd have to go look at the notes, but it wasn't Rios. It was a different one. It was the Stinking Corpse Tale, and it was the Beerhorst translation.
But these, of course, are the ones that are derived from the handful of the codices that were. Yeah, there's like the four.
They're all like 15th, 16th century texts that were put together in part using indigenous people, basically relating, the history of these things. So that it really points to a twofold problem. On the one hand, the textual data that you have is 15th, 16th century. The flip side of that is, a related problem is the people they were using to interview. Okay, that we have no way of knowing that how versed those people actually were in their own prehistory. I mean, it could have just been whoever the survivor was, whoever was willing to do this. So I'm sure you got some good things. I'm sure you got some others that maybe only knew half of a story or something like that. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But the real problem is the stories they do relate. So the ones that we do have are not modern accounts. I mean, there's one exception here with Cortez, but most of it is like, the first sun, which would have been the first age in Aztec history or mythology. So this is like remote antiquity, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit misleading to come across these sites on the internet and think like wow, this story that this native is telling this European. Some of these sites create the impression like these are eyewitnesses, like it's something right at that time. That's not actually the case. So, but it's interesting nonetheless. There's one of them that in part reads. It has some pretty clear parallels to Genesis 6, but the problem with that one is the giants in that story. This is the Kinametan or the Kinametsin, and it's a Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language term for bird-legged. Okay. So the idea was that their legs were so thin and frail when you knocked one over they couldn't get up. I mean that very obviously doesn't sound like a Nephilim or a Hibbarim or something like that. So that's a significant disconnection, but there's still a flood context, So it's hard to know why you get some details and then other details, and because they're so different, they're so diametrically opposed.
And then part of the challenge with regard to the flood stuff is to what degree have they been exposed to, the Franciscans or Jesuits?
I know.
Yeah.
So how much of that content is filtered or interpreted by the person recording the material?
Sure.
And that you do get that problem with Cortez, like the white god, mythology. That's really part of that whole thing going on. In the Cortez example, they don't have a contemporary situation where Cortez's men see a giant, but rather bones are brought. And I relate it to an article. There's actually a really detailed article on mammoth remains in Mexico, and it's hundreds of places. And so whoever did that, correlated some of these stories with these spots, where prehistoric remains were discovered. So that's probably what's going on there with Cortez. It would be different if it was like hey, we saw this guy come into camp and he was really huge. It's not like that. It's the natives are telling them these stories, and then the Spaniards believe it. They truck in, like some molars or whatever it was that they brought in. But it wasn't like fresh meat. It was these were bones and
right.
Fossilized remains. So it's really inconclusive. As to what's going on there, but again, this is what we do in Fringe Pop. It's stuff that people should know about, and give it some context.
Well, and negative evidence is still evidence. It's still important to the intellectual chase, but it also illustrates why I think that the archaeological component of these questions are the most difficult.
Yeah.
Because the physical evidence is, I'm not ready to say that it's not there, but it's in such small amount, and there's so many hoaxes.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
And as you pointed out, you have the issue of paleontological.
Yeah, the Proboscidean problem is actually a real problem. For your listeners, Proboscideans would be mammoths. Anything with a trunk,
right.
That kind of thing. And so when you get a skull, it leaves that hole in the middle because the tusks are missing. And you get that. That happens all the time. There's actually a pretty decent number of journal articles like this one that focused on Mexico that I referenced this time that have tackled that problem. It's not. It's really odd. On the one hand, we've done 3 episodes now on New World giant stuff. And the best one, the one that has the real evidence, was the one we did on North America, which is the Bureau of Ethnology. The Smithsonian report from 1894, where I think it was 5 or 6 skeletons that were recovered from mounds that were over 7 feet tall. So this is demonstrably real stuff. But the irony is that typically the North American giant mythology denies indigenous creation of the mounds, but that's actually where you find the best evidence.
Right.
And it's just this weird sort of inverted, like, do the math. Like why would you deny this one thing over here and here you have good evidence, for this over here? It's just really odd. But,
Why are these things relevant that you cover on Fringe Pop? Why do Christians need to be thinking about the weird things, about the paranormal
weird
things?
Stuff, I think a channel like Fringe Pop and just the subject, just the inquiry in general, I think is not only useful for apologetics, but in our day and age is actually becoming almost necessary, because there are an increasing number of people who are either jaded or who have rejected what we would call a traditional Judeo-Christian worldview. So there are lots of people who've rejected that, but there are also a lot of people who have also rejected a worldview that is nothing more than scientific materialism. That's just unsatisfactory on a number of levels. And so they want mystery, they want transcendence, they want something that, again, is bigger than themselves, again, and there's a suspicion. It's part of the postmodern mind. There's a suspicion of authority on either side of this. And so this kind of content provides like a middle way, a middle worldview. And so this is why, Ancient Aliens is so popular. It preserves the transcendent, but it rejects these two other things. And so that has, it preserves kind of the way we're hardwired. We're hardwired to believe that there's something bigger than ourselves, the whole religious impulse. That's really a lot of hardwiring. I mean, you know this from anthropology. So this sort of strokes that need or fills that void for a lot of people. So ghosts, aliens, mysteries of the past that the scientific community either is completely dismissive of or doesn't really give attention, which creates the impression that they're avoiding it. So any number of these sorts of things that show up on History Channel or just the internet in general, so many people watch that, and it doesn't have to, but for many it leads to a reinforcing of the rejection of, again, the traditional Judeo-Christian worldview. And really, I mean, you might think, well, that's okay. It's good that they reject the other side, the scientific materialism. Yeah, I agree. I'm not a materialist, but I also think that there's something to the scientific method.
Certainly.
It's important because it's a process of thinking and evaluating evidence. Yes, we don't want to be materialists here, and we're not, but clear thinking is actually a good thing. So there are people who just reject that as well, because it doesn't lead to this conclusion, this thing they want to believe that's kind of in the center. So you get enough people like that, and it's hard to have conversations about getting them to consider, in our case, a biblical worldview. They either don't think they need it, or they think they've trumped it by virtue of this other knowledge, this special secret knowledge that they got from Giorgio on Ancient Aliens.
Never heard of them.
Right. It's just this, I think it's really important, again, to be able to at least engage and at least affirm that somebody's interest in that is a good thing. But again, what we try to do with Fringe Pop is, okay, here's this thing, it's interesting, it's worth spending time to do an episode on, but maybe you need to think a little bit better about primary sources and think a little more logically, and you reach this conclusion, but did you factor this question in your conclusion? I mean, this is what we're trying to do, just to help people think a little bit better.
Sure.
And value primary sources, because the Bible is one of those primary sources.
And in an age when people can post their favorite website or YouTube video as rationale for their argument.
Right, right. I posted it, so there's my argument.
Right, exactly. I'm just sharing an anecdote here. I got into a debate on Facebook with someone about Lupercalia.
I hope I never am able to say that.
Well, I try to avoid them as much as I possibly can, but it was about the Lupercalia, and which was happened in February on the Roman calendar, and is generally associated with the god Pan, who we talked about this week in the context of our Satyrs episode. But the argument that they were trying to make was, look, this is the same thing as Valentine's Day, and there were which Saint Valentine do we choose from? And,
if two things look alike, they must be the
same. And so I asked simply, give me a primary source to support your argument.
Right.
And there was just a parade of YouTube videos. The idea is just completely lost, at some point, and that may not be their fault entirely. It may be the fault of the.
It probably isn't. But I mean.
But that's the value of programs like Fringe Pop is to reassert the value of primary sources.
And we try to create a web page. We're a little bit behind on web pages, but we try to create a web page for each episode. Everyone that I do before I get here, I've already written the web page.
Mhm.
But we're a little bit behind on getting those things edited and posted. But on each of those, I try to list, again, peer-reviewed source material, not just books that you could find on Amazon, but journal articles and things like this. And a lot of people don't even know those things exist. And the shocking part is, you can have people graduate from college and never have been asked to read a journal article. Like they have no idea what one is.
Yeah.
You know, well, could I buy that in the bookstore? Was that no? It's a journal article. I mean, so there are a lot of people who even who get through college that have no idea that there's a massive, enormous body of scholarly research that's published that doesn't live on the internet and is not a book. And honestly, my own personal study, journals are the first thing I use. Because if it's a good journal article, it's basically, I mean, I'm fundamentally lazy, I guess, you know. I mean, they do the work for you.
They do the heavy lifting for you.
It's like a mini dissertation,
Yeah.
you know, like they're wonderful because what's published in journals is scholars writing for scholars. You know, they write for the people in the guild, and that presses them to do really careful research because it gets anonymously reviewed by field experts before it's published. I mean, this is why this stuff is important. And so, you know, I can sit, it's easy for me to sit there and watch the History Channel and hear yet again about how scholars are flummoxed by, you know, this, they're that. No, actually they're not. There's like 20 journal articles I could give you in an hour on this, but the average person watching this has no idea that stuff even exists. It's not that they don't know how to get to it, they literally don't know it exists. And so that's another thing we're trying to do, just, you know, I hate to call it awareness raising, but fundamentally that's what it is.
It is, yeah. And it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with people having degrees, because a lot of this stuff is just, it's public access, it's databases.
Yeah, if it's not, I mean, like journals, it's just, I mean, I know why they do it, you know, because I worked for 15 years at Logos, and we have conversations with people who publish, you know, the outfits that publish journals all the time. So I know why they do it. Some of the reasons are intelligent, in other words, it's economic, but a lot of their other reasons are just snobbery. But this is academia, this is the way it is. And they don't post things on the internet. You cannot just get access to them. So if you have, what I advise people to do is, look, if you went to college or you went to seminary or something like that, you should have probably, I would think, still an institutional email address. And you should be able to use that to get library privileges, to at least search for these articles. And, and if you get library privileges, and you may have to pay $20 a year. Like when we lived in the Northwest, I wasn't near an institution that I attended, but all I had to do was pay $25 a year to use the Trinity Western Library, a research library. And what that meant was I could log in, search their journal databases, and all the journal articles are free in PDF.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Anybody can do that.
Yeah, I don't know if you've gone to college. If you're an alumnus of a school, I don't know any place that wouldn't give you a library card.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's the digital equivalent for a library card, and you know, it's a minimal cost, but to be able to get to the journal databases is just it's really indispensable.
It's invaluable
for anybody who wants to do serious research.
Agreed. Well, how do folks access Fringe Pop?
Fringe Pop, you could just go to YouTube and search for it. Just Fringe Pop 321, it'll come up. We're not competing with any other Fringe Pops, at least right now. So we're about 100 episodes in. You know, so that's the easy way to find the YouTube channel. If you were using Google, you'd find it as well if you put in the same search terms. If you're on my website, it's going to be in one of the pull-down menus, you know, link to the website.
Why don't you throw out your website?
My website is drmsh.com. So dr as in doctor, and then my initials.com.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, you
Appreciate
bet.
it.
Absolutely.